Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Knowledge Bank webinar. Today's session is being presented by David Hills from Ark Workplace Risk, and he is going to be speaking to you about building safety and the hidden cost of compliance. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please submit them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will try to get through as many as possible at the end. The webinar is also being recorded today, so for anyone that would like to re-watch it back, it will be available on the News on the Block YouTube channel. Um, that is all from me. I am now going to pass you over to David to begin the webinar.
Thank you very much, Vicky. Good morning, everybody. I hope you are all well. My name is David Hills. I'm Senior Director, Regulatory Technical and Technology at Ark Workplace Risk. This isn't a sales show, but I do just want to quickly talk to you about who Ark are. We are a consultancy operating for more than 30 years now, about 35 years now. In the industry, we provide industry leadership. We look to serve as an extension of your team, delivering tailored safety solutions that protect your people, your properties, and operations. Enough about us. Let's get into what we're going to be discussing today. I want to start talking about the commercial framework around building safety, because that's the area where we believe there needs to be some significant rethinking and reframing. We're going to look at what the real cost drivers are. We're going to look at safety management and compliance spend, which therefore provides value. We're looking at a term called interoperability, or a whole building approach, as a risk and a cost lever. And we're going to look at how we can move from a reactive compliance process, which is traditionally what we have in our sector, to an owner-controlled model. And at the end, as Vicky said there, I will be taking any questions that you may have. A little bit about me. I've been working for Ark for almost 26 years. Literally in about 3 or 4 days' time, I will be 26 years at Ark. Prior to that, I was in building control. I support clients. I'm a fire engineer, a health and safety consultant, and a chartered surveyor. I'm also part of a number of working groups and support a number of organisations in how they can prepare and plan for the Building Safety Act and its secondary legislation. Okay, enough about all that. Got rid of that done pretty quickly. So let's go straight into the slideshow. I mentioned earlier that we believe at Ark that there is a need for a reframing. And that reframing is all about how we perceive building safety, trying to move it from a burden to something that actually will provide value and actually improve decision making. I think, though, right at the very beginning of this whole process, there's been a particular problem in the industry. And I'm going to include the Building Safety Regulators Office as well, because I think building safety has been seen just as a construction phase issue. And I think it's fair to say that perhaps there's been far too much focus on construction rather than existing occupied buildings. I think it's very interesting when you look at the figures. There are approximately 500 construction projects underway that involve the Building Safety Act, and yet we've got almost 17,000 in-use buildings. So there's a differential there that I think we need to look at. So we believe there's been far too much focus on construction rather than occupied buildings. Now, I know that's nothing new to all of you. Managing agents over the years have had to deal with the fallout from construction decisions and the fallout from construction actions. But at last, though, we are now seeing, certainly from the authorities and from the construction industry itself, a recognition that building safety is no longer episodic. What I mean by that, it's no longer just about them. It's no longer something that disappears once practical completion is achieved, especially for contractors, because contractors are now being called in afterwards to remediate issues that they have caused. So we are now seeing that the Construction Industry Leadership Council, for example, now has for the first time what we call an occupation phase as one of the major phases of the 7 that they include as part of their processes. And I think it's also fair that we can actually turn around and say that occupation phase, which was perhaps once the neglected child of construction, is no longer the case. We are seeing a change in approach from not only industry, but we're seeing a change in approach from the building safety regulator as well. Design and construction, though, if you think about it, as most of us will understand and know, is effectively a 5-year bump in the road. What I mean by that is it takes around about, on average, 5 years to get a building from design through to a practical completion, on average. But the regulatory and the safety obligations attached to that particular occupied building is going to sit with that building for the next 50 to 60 years. And that means that safety is a long-term operational liability and governance responsibility for owners and the managing agents. The decisions that are made during design and construction now actually determine your long-term compliance costs, your ongoing governance burdens, your technology overheads, and your safety case complexity. The more complex the design is, the more complex and non-code compliant arrangements a building now uses during its design and construction basically means that you're going to have a much more complex safety case report, and your regulatory exposure is going to increase. In short, if you think about it, safety, design, and quality effectively now becomes a yield issue and a long-term cost. As I said, building safety is at last seen as something that happens not just at the end of a construction project and then fade away. It's now seen as something that is going to be in place for many, many years. Owners, agents, and effectively the new regime that's now in place means that it's now a permanent feature of your operating model. Safety has got to be considered as a permanent element that needs to be thought of not just annually, not just once we've gone through a particular project. It needs to be thought of on a very regular basis. This isn't now what we could call occasional compliance. It's a recurring compliance requirement, and therefore it's a recurring cost with continuous regulatory exposure and clearly defined under the new Act, clearly defined owner-based obligations. I think that's a really important part that we need to think of. Accountability now sits at ownership level, not with managing agents, not with subcontractors. Owners and investors now have obligations. Yes, we obviously have to understand that managing agents are there and will be heavily involved supporting the client through the whole process. But we have to acknowledge that the building assessment certificate process is an owner-led process. And building assessment applications as well are not one-off exercises either. They actually follow the asset throughout its life cycle. And recently, I have to say, at Ark, we have been discussing with a number of large property owners who are telling us now that building safety has in fact become a due diligence and refinancing event. They are being asked not just to provide safety case reports to the regulator, but they're being asked to provide it to banks, to investors, and even in some instances to insurers. So importantly, we can see that compliance doesn't just create cost, it actually exposes cost. And what I mean by that, well, if you think about this, the more rigorously you examine your building, which you have to now, the regulator requires you to do so, investors and others and insurers require you to take a real in-depth view of your building through the safety case report. Well, again, as you say, the more rigorously you examine the building, the more clearly underlying data gaps, system weaknesses, and governance issues actually emerge. So if we want to control cost, the first step for us, we believe, is all about understanding what truly drives that cost, because we can only manage it strategically rather than reactively if we understand what's driving it. So let's look at what actually is driving cost at the moment. Now, historically, safety compliance, let's be honest, was largely project-based. You completed construction, you achieved sign-off, you moved on. You then took over the building, and then once a year you thought about what assessments you were going to have, and then you dealt with it, and you didn't think about it until the next year. That model has gone. Under the Building Safety Act, for buildings that are actually covered by the Act, safety now is recurring. It's continually evidence. It's auditable. And very importantly, we have an enforcer who has recently stated very clearly that they intend to enforce the Act. They believe now that many people have been given, since 2022, when the Act was passed, and 2023, when there was a legal requirement to have a safety case report, by now the regulator is expecting you to have all of this in place. We've had 3 years to get ourselves sorted. So we can see that the regulator is now going to be actually just pulling people's and requiring you to submit your building assessment certificate without much notice. We were using a tranche system. The regulator has decided to move away from that and now will pull buildings in as and when they see fit. So if, for example, you have an issue at your property, if, for example, they receive a complaint about your property, I would strongly suggest that you are suddenly going to get a requirement to submit your building assessment certificate application. Now, the building assessment certificate application is a major element of the new safety regime, and it's effectively your approval to occupy and operate that particular building. But achieving it isn't just what everyone believes is just the safety case report. It's much more than that, because the regulator isn't just looking at the safety case report. Yes, it's an important part of it. It requires more than just that, though. It needs a well-maintained golden thread, a really good maintenance regime that's clearly evidenced, a building safety management system. It's quite interesting how many building assessment certificates have failed because they don't have a building management system. And importantly, it's understanding that your safety case report is a live, continuous assessment process. It requires ongoing safety management activities. It requires you to engage on a regular basis with residents and others. And it means that you need to have in place established governance systems and really good competent supply chains. So the building assessment certificate, if you think about it, is transaction relevant. They are also refinancing relevant. We're already seeing applications are being asked for by those particular persons. So owners can no longer just assume that safety risks sit with the managing agent or with consultants. They have, as part of this accountability or accountable person model, introduced effectively a new explicit requirement that this is now an ownership-led requirement and obligation. So Let's just address very quickly then a common misconception that the application for a building assessment certificate is just the cost that we have to pay. The cost actually is far more than that. The cost is about maintaining your compliance posture, the posture that you've told the regulator that you intend to comply with, and the cost to justify your claims of safety and then maintain that, not just once. The requirement in law is that every 5 years you will be required to renew your building assessment certificate. And every 5 years, your application for renewal will be scrutinized and considered by the building safety regulator, who, let's be honest, will be asking, well, what's happened in the intervening period? What version of the document am I actually looking at? Have risks changed? Have we undertaken any assessments? What works have we made to the particular building? Have we engaged, and how have we engaged with residents, and how has that process supported this whole new regime? This process, this building assessment certification process, is a living, breathing process that if we believe we can deal with once every 5 years and do nothing in the intervening period, then the opportunities that arise from the Act will fade and your costs will grow. And I can tell you straight away from what the regulator has very recently stated is that they see this as an ongoing dynamic process, a change from the once a year focus on safety to it being a daily focus. So let's have a look then at these real cost drivers. Now, critically, the regulator is actually not the focus of your building assessment certificate. In theory, the principal accountable person, the owner of the building, needs to take accountability and responsibility for not only his assessment, but everything that leads up to it. He needs to drive that whole process. And the regulator is there to check, but they're not just checking or assessing paperwork. They're assessing the systems that are in place. It's not a static submission, as we mentioned earlier. It's a dynamic, continuous process. And that's where the true cost stack actually begins to emerge. So I want to break this down into 3 phases, if I can. Pre-building assessment certificate, the during building assessment certificate, and post-building assessment applications. So let's just have a look at the cost drivers relating to pre-certification. Now that's going to start off with the need to capture, store, and then manage on an ongoing basis the golden thread. That's ensuring, for example, you have all the right information available, that all the right information is also up to date and accurate. A lot of people are finding when they submit applications to the regulator that what they've submitted is actually inaccurate, and the regulator is picking that up. It's going to include your technology costs in keeping that golden thread up to date. You've got to keep it digitally. It's got to be also transferable when it's actually needed. It's also about making sure that you have the right fire and structural safety strategies and assessments, and that they have actually been implemented correctly. You can't just assume, I've done an assessment, it's all okay. It's about understanding and obtaining all of the appropriate assessments, your certificates and approvals, and then implementing the right level of safety assurance, management, maintenance, and governance, and showing that all of that is linked. It's about identifying all of your safety critical elements that the building actually holds with, and then developing and formulating that safety case report that brings all of what we've just been talking about together. And then, of course, it's all about engaging the right level of technical support and competence and making sure that your team are competent and that your supply chain are competent. Now, from the information we have from speaking to our clients, these costs have proven to be in excess of 75,000 all the way up to 120,000 K. So we're talking about a significant cost stack there, that just to get yourself ready for a building assessment certificate. I do believe, and we believe, that those costs are going to come down. Those costs are going to come down because I think what the regulator has done so far is deal with perhaps the most complicated buildings that are out there. And we're now going to start to see the more simpler buildings. Is simpler the right word? But it is now anyway. We're going to see that occurring. So we're going to see, I believe, a reduction in those costs. But it's still a significant amount of money. So let's move on to the next phase then, the during building assessment application phase. Now that phase is, I would suggest, rarely linear. What I mean by that is that it's going to cost you money to prepare your application, the actual submission. You are going to have to pay some initial application fees. You are most often, we've seen a large number of the applications so far. The building safety regulator has requested further information, or requests for information, or RFIs as they call it. And those RFIs, from what we've seen so far, actually introduce delay. They introduce additional costs. For example, they often ask for additional assessments, additional calculations. They're looking for amended calculations or clarifications of assessments. All of that introduces further costs in order to support your technical justification. Now, in a recent freedom of information request, the actual regulator informed the industry that the average fees charged by the regulator alone, purely to issue a building assessment certificate, is around £23,000. But with all of the other work that is generally needed, those fees tend to grow up to around about £32,000. So the application process is significant. So let's move on then to the next element, and it's the element that is most often just amalgamated into your general operating budgets, and this, I believe, is where the real economics actually lie. These costs, the costs of dealing with your building and preparing your building for 5 years down the line, when you are going to have to resubmit your application, include things such as ongoing maintenance of the buildings, fire and structural and other life safety elements. It's generally all contained within your PPM programs and arrangements. And additionally, it's also going to include things such as your technology costs. You're going to have to make sure that you have those technology systems in place to ensure that you can keep the golden thread digitally available and transferable when it's required. It's all about making sure that you are undertaking all of your safety obligations, your regulated safety obligations, such as your regular inspections, your examinations, your certifications, your assessments. It's about making sure that your assessments and approvals are not only just undertaken, but the issues that arise out of them are dealt with promptly. And that's a legal requirement now. It's also about making sure that your safety case report, which, as we've discussed earlier, is not just put on a shelf and left to gather dust. It's a living, breathing document that the BSR is actually expecting you, and the law requires you to review on a regular basis, most likely, and probably annually, or when the building or the organization is subject to change. Costs also include, for example, your day-to-day maintenance and your governance and system costs. So, for example, managing agent inspections, administration. And one of the key elements of the Building Safety Act also relates to resident engagement and the ongoing costs you will find relating to that particular process. Understanding your resident cohort, sharing information. If a resident requests a copy of the safety case report, or the most up-to-date version of the safety case report, or up-to-date version of the fire risk assessment, you are legally bound to provide that digitally to them. It isn't just a case of, oh, you provide everything to everybody. There are certain documents you have to provide on an annual basis. There are certain documents that you have to provide when they are requested. And then we start that whole process off again, preparing to resubmit our building assessment application on the 5-year anniversary. So you can see that these costs therefore become embedded OPEX. And according to some of our clients, they believe that over a 5-year period, those costs are going to be in excess of 250K. Word of warning, that is probably based upon the fact that we are dealing, or have been dealing, with some of the most complex buildings. But 250K over 5 years, it needs to be understood. It needs to be identified. Okay, so we at Ark firmly believe that building safety can no longer sit invisibly inside your general operating budget. It needs to be isolated, it needs to be understood, and it needs to be managed as its own cost category. Because once you break it down, and break it down properly, the true cost layers will then become clear. In many instances, we have seen, and this is what clients have told us, in many instances, costs are often underestimated. So first, there are the obvious costs, the direct compliance activities, your fire risk assessment, your structural reviews, the inspections, the certifications. These are all visible. They're invoice driven, and therefore they're relatively easy to track. But that's only the surface layer. Beneath that sits things such as remedial works that stem from those inspections. It sits with data production. It sits with data validation. It's continuous capture and maintenance of your golden thread. It's about verifying the documentation that you have, updating your asset registers, managing the safety elements, and of course, managing them with your supply chain. So ensuring, for example, that your assessments are based on accurate current data is, let's be honest, resource intensive, and it's going to be ongoing. So then you have the costs relating to how you manage evidence, how you control, how you store, how you structure, how you maintain auditable records. And add to that the internal management costs, such as time spent by asset managers, compliance leads, and senior leadership who are trying to oversee your organization's safety posture. All of those add to costs. And finally, you've got to understand as well that the regulator is there not just to deal with the building assessment certificate. The regulator is going to be involved in your building. The regulator may ask to visit your building. The regulator may, because they've received a complaint, or that perhaps a mandatory occurrence report has been submitted, they will want to come and have a look and follow up and investigate and look to find out how you are managing complaints. And each one of those consumes time, it consumes perhaps consultant input, it consumes cost. And when all of these layers are therefore bundled into your general OPEX, it's easy, from what our clients tell us, to underestimate the true run rate of costs of staying compliant and keeping up to date in respect of the Act. Understanding these layers is, for us, the first step of making safety spend predictable. It's about making safety spend efficient and about making sure that it's value protective rather than just reactive or disruptive. Which, let's be honest, safety spend can be very reactive and disruptive. So we believe there's actually a time to shift our perspective, and that time is now. Compliance is, as I mentioned right at the very beginning, is often seen as a burden. But compliance maturity, we have seen, actually will and can deliver measurable value across your asset lifecycle. If it's done properly, it can reduce regulator intervention risk, it can reduce potential penalties, it can reduce costly remediation or rework because something's been done inaccurately, and it can reduce delays. It improves transparency, especially if you are working with investors and insurers. And it also provides that single source of truth and reduces what we like to call transaction friction and audit readiness. Compliance also delivers predictability of OPEX and balance sheet quality. So for us, compliance isn't just simply a defensive process. It actually, for us, we believe, becomes a strategic capability. And so I think it's really important that we need to think about where resilience and organizational consistency are important or are fundamental to what we do. Then we believe then understanding costs and understanding your real compliance costs and making sure that those compliance costs are predictable, then we need to separate them from our normal OPEX process. So we've worked with a number of clients to see how they can go through this particular process and what benefits they can get. As I said, we've spoken about compliance to many organizations who used to think it as a burden, but now they've changed that approach and they've looked at it now as a cost to manage. And they've made sure that they no longer consider that this is just a tick box exercise. They see it now as a change of compliance as being far more powerful. It isn't a drag on performance, and they've found that if it's dealt with properly and openly, they've actually found that it's been an enabler to performance. They've been able to reduce significantly their costs by actually making sure that they thoroughly understand them. So by embedding robust compliance into your operations, they have been able to unlock clearer decision-making processes. They've been able to ensure that their assets will stand up to scrutiny in what, let's be honest, is a tightening regulatory landscape. And where appropriate, they've also found it, I can only talk about one particular client, they found actually when they've been going through a refinancing conversation, that actually they've been able to actually go through that process with a little bit more predictability. So where long-term stewardship is everything, and let's be honest, owners are very concerned about long-term stewardship, then compliance can transform safety from a one-off requirement into something that is strategic. It can protect residents. It can strengthen investor confidence and ultimately enhance property and portfolio value over time. What our clients are telling us is that the benefits of achieving compliance and monitoring it in the way we've just spoken about isn't always obvious, but they do actually provide resilience, and they actually have been able to sort out and deliver some future-proofing especially in respect of value of their building. So let's quickly discuss operational reality. Many managing agents manage their properties with multiple consultants, with multiple contractors, and sometimes with fragmented systems. Effectively, data is disconnected. Evidence trails are often buried in inboxes, meaning that so often data is actually unusable. The result is what we've seen often is repeated surveys, repeated revalidations, some conservative decision making, inflated OPEX, and sometimes audit friction. That for us is evidence of cost leakage. And for us, we believe it's entirely avoidable. If we invest in structured safety management and compliance systems, then it isn't just about a regulatory requirement. It can become a strategic lever. By centralizing your evidence, by standardizing your workflows, and by connecting your data sets, we believe that you can reduce redundancy and free up your team's time to make informed, timely decisions. And every pound, we believe, spent on proper compliance infrastructure goes towards preventing multiple layers of rework, audits, and operational efficiencies. In short, the costs the cost actually is an investment that directly protects the property and operational efficiency, turning safety management from a compliance checkbox into a tangible value driver. That's not just us saying it, that's our clients telling us how they see this particular process working. So I mentioned value there. We hear a lot about value for the residents, value for investors, value across the life cycle of an asset. Yet building safety and compliance, as I said earlier, is often treated as a mandatory overhead, a burden, a regulatory checkbox that we just have to tolerate. That mindset for us, in our opinion, is outdated. And we believe that it's actually costing the sector some real opportunities and costing the sector significant amounts of money. So here's what we see as the new reality. When we approach compliance strategically, it's not just a cost. It becomes a lever. It becomes a structured engine for risk mitigation, for asset protection and resilience. It can give owners, managing agents, and teams clarity, sharper decision-making capability, and when needed, a stronger position for refinancing or attracting new capital. The benefits don't actually stop there. The benefits can include, for example, proactive compliance, asset protection and reduction in operational friction, and can actually cut down organizational risk. It can enhance the tenant and the resident's experience by, and also it can, in fact, in one instance, we were told it actually boosts occupancy and retention when the client is using their safety record to sell their particular approach. It can, as I say, boost occupancy and retention. And of course, it's going to align with many of your ESG commitments. It will strengthen your brand value, and actually it can actually create a genuine competitive edge in what is, let's be honest, a crowded marketplace. So the question isn't whether compliance is worth the investment. The question is, are we actually ready to unlock its full potential? Compliance isn't a burden that needs to be absorbed. We believe it's a capability to leverage. It can transform safety from a regulatory requirement into long-term value creation, to protecting the portfolio both today and strengthening that portfolio for tomorrow. That's the opportunity we believe that's in front of us. And we believe that owners and managing agents who seize that will lead the next phase of growth in the sector. Now, we often hear a term called interoperability. And I want to turn to that. It's a big word and one that can actually be confusing. It's been used by the regulator quite often, and Dame Judith Hackett has talked about it. And Dame Judith is now involved in a number of the working groups that are advising government on the next steps in respect of building safety. We see interoperability as a key element of unlocking opportunity. If you think of your buildings as a set of interconnected elements, that's what interoperability is all about. It's about accepting the fact that we don't deal with buildings in silos, that the whole building is a series of layers of equipment, of systems, of design, of construction, but also a system of a system of interconnected layers of protection. And if we think of it that way, then it becomes clear that building safety, risk, compliance, and management cannot be considered in isolation. The building's fire and life safety systems and arrangements are directly linked to the fire strategy. And that defines how the building is intended to perform in an emergency. And that fire strategy, in turn, actually underpins the fire risk assessment. Now, those assessments and that strategy will actually inform your safety case and your safety case report, which actually is designed to set out how risks are identified, controlled, and managed. And those documents are all designed to support your building assessment certificate application and ultimately, hopefully, achieve approval from the BSR. The safety case report is also supported by, I would suggest, building-based operational procedures, the training that your staff have, how you manage your staff, how you manage your supply chain, your contractors. All of those actually are interlinked, are interoperable with every piece of your building. The key point here is that if one of those elements change, if one of those elements has a particular problem, and let's be brutally honest, during the life cycle of a building, that's going to happen on many different occasions, then the others have to be checked, validated, and where necessary, updated to maintain a whole building safety position and ensuring that interoperability is actually managed. And that's what the regulator is actually expecting, which you can see, therefore, that if we don't do this right, and if we don't, then those costs are going to rack up. So a whole building approach starts with that recognition that building safety risks are not created by a single system or a single decision. They are created by the interaction of many, many components, that interoperable approach. Fire and structural safety systems, as I say, rely upon the integrity of the building fabric and compartmentation to perform. Those technical measures are only effective if they're supported by digital and physical safety information, the golden thread, which will inform your decision-making process, which will actually make sure that you've got the right degree and level of maintenance and management. So management procedures and robust change control arrangements actually do provide great governance that will hold all of this whole process together, while contractors, residents, and enforcers, they all play a particular role in how that building functions in practice. Ultimately, it is down to you to ensure that you understand what interacts with each other. A change in one can create impacts across several others. And interoperability is what enables those components effectively to operate as a single coherent risk management system, rather than a connection of independent parts. Without it, from what we see, it becomes fragmented. It means that accountability is not held where it needs to be, and assurance is weakened. Okay, so many portfolios don't actually struggle because they don't have sufficient tools or systems. In our experience, they tend to struggle because their tools and their systems either don't talk to each other, or they don't provide or unlock the clarity and the efficiency and the control that's needed. Integration, not acquisition for us, is the true bottleneck. In our experience, when an organization actually understands and then adopts an interoperable approach, that tends to create a standardized shared data set so that everyone in the team, every system speaks and uses the same language. They may not fully talk to each other, and it isn't required that they all talk to each other, but we've got to use the same language. We've got to understand what is creating risk. It reduces, in our experience, duplication and wasted effort. It gives you consistent, real-time risk visibility, and it gives you more confidence in what you've got. It can streamline audit processes. It can certainly make writing a safety case much easier if we've got a very well developed interoperable approach. And very importantly, it can remove some of the headaches about making sure that you are compliant. Simply put, for us, interoperability doesn't just connect your tools and your systems. It also connects your people, your data, your strategy, unlocking that efficiency, unlocking the clarity, and actually being able to make decisions so much easier, so much quicker, and therefore being audit ready. So this is one of the areas that we just wanted to just talk about, and I'm coming towards the end of what I wanted to go through this morning, and that is there's a structural shift that we believe needs to be recognized. Historically, compliance has largely been outsourced, and the narrative has been driven by managing agents, you, and consultants and advisors rather than owners. Compliance spend has generally been reactive and more often event-led and almost certainly unpredictable. Safety, therefore, has tended to sit in the background until something triggered an action, an audit, a transaction, a regulatory request. That model no longer works. The regulator is not going to accept that. Today, owners must become system orchestrators. Yes, managing agents may be seen as the concert master, the lead violinist, but it means that owners, with your help, must be setting safety standards across their portfolio, not relying on fragmented external advice. It means integrated risk frameworks where fire and structural safety operations and governance connects. It means controlling all of the interfaces between the managing agent, the owner, as well as the managing agents, consultants, and contractors. So that all of the data, all of the accountability and decision-making sit effectively with the owner, supported by the managing agent. So how do we go about delivering this? If we accept that building safety is now an ownership responsibility and property managers support owners, the question becomes, how do you move from a reactive compliance process within a compliance landscape to an owner-controlled or led compliance landscape? The answer, we think, is based around a three-phase transition approach: stabilize, integrate, and control. What we mean by that is that in order to stabilize, you start to isolate your building safety costs from your traditional operating budget. If you can't see those costs clearly, you can't manage them. Clarity is required in respect of what your safety obligations actually are, and then you'll be able to map out your true cost stack across the asset's life cycle. You can identify duplications, you can identify fragmentation, you can identify cost leakage. Then you can set the minimum standards that you want across your building or across the portfolio, and basically deliver visibility and baseline control. You then move on to phase two, which is all about integration. We now have stabilized. We now understand where our costs are. We now understand what are the critical elements. We now understand what our standards are. Now it's all about integrating and aligning those systems that you have in place, your suppliers, against those particular standards, establishing that single source of truth for each building. It's about making sure that you and your consultants ensure that evidence is only generated once and can be used and reused many, many times. It's effectively about embedding that assurance into your day-to-day operations, rather than just treating this as a periodic event. And then finally, what's worked well with our clients is to then start to take control, moving out of the integration and the implementation phase into structured monitoring, structured reporting, governance reporting, and assurance processes, moving from surprise costs to a much more predictable run rate of compliance, and ensure that you are regulator ready at the time, not scrambling for information when you are requested to provide it. It's also making sure that you are prepared for any financing or any transaction. It's not about spending more. Far from it. In our opinion, from what our clients tell us, it's also about spending intelligently, reducing the friction and turning safety management into an enterprise risk management approach rather than just purely administration. So let me close with this. Building safety is no longer just a regulatory side issue. It's now, and we have to all now accept this, a permanent operating obligation that has to be embedded within modern day operation or operating models if we're going to be able to realize the opportunities that they actually provide. The real cost is not about achieving compliance once, as so often many of our clients believe that's the case. It's about sustaining a defensible compliance posture year after year. It's about making sure that if we have fragmented systems and duplicated assessments and disconnected data, that we actually deal with those so they are not eroding our net operating income. And interoperability and structured governance are not just about technical upgrades. They are actually and can be cost and risk levers. And compliance maturity, we have seen with some of our clients, has directly influenced how they've been able to deal with their buildings, both in respect of liquidity, insurance, and positioning. Positioning, especially when it comes to valuation and ultimately owner and investment confidence. The shift, we believe, is clear. We need to be able to move from a reactive outsourcing approach to a controlled orchestration approach, from consultant-led narratives to owner and agent-led narratives, from unpredictable spikes in spend to stable, transparent compliance OPEX, and from inappropriate safety maturity to a much more mature approach that actually supports your investments rather than just be part of it. For us, a building safety is not just compliant, it is more resilient, it's more financeable, it's more, and ultimately, I would suggest more valuable. Vicky, thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Any questions?
Hello. Yes, we've got a couple here. So the first question is, with all these rising costs, inflation, contractor price increases, if residents cannot afford all the additional required works, how can we manage the site effectively? Can we simply document that there are too low funds for some of the works?
I think that's actually a dangerous approach without going through this approach of actually understanding what our costs are
Mhm.
And I think that open approach has proven for a number of our clients, that open approach of being able to turn around and say, okay, so what do we have to actually do over the next 5 years? And actually informing tenants about what you're doing. They can, and as an industry, we can then put pressure on the government, who, let's be honest, doesn't understand property management,
Yeah.
doesn't understand property ownership. It doesn't understand that you ask a managing agent and put onto a managing agent the fact that they've got to introduce the safety case report, for example. Well, that's going to have to be paid for by residents, and residents are not told this. They're not informed. And I think that's what's the important part here. I don't think we're going to see government cut down costs,
Hmm.
unfortunately. I think there is a need to, in my opinion, and in our opinion, to rethink some of what's actually coming up in respect of new legislation on fire risk assessments, new legislation on how you manage supply chains, and how you measure and monitor competence. All of those costs ultimately are going to be fed down to residents. So I think we need to start by actually understanding exactly what is required, and what actually our costs are on a longer term, rather than being event driven. Hopefully that's answered the question. I don't know.
They haven't left their name, but obviously, if it's not answered the question and you want to get in touch with David, then please feel
Certainly.
free to do so.
Details
Um,
are there, and
yeah, there you go.
we'll make
Perfect.
sure you've got copies of the slides as well. So
So there's one more question here at the moment remaining. Says, hi David, what are your views on the building safety director role? It does follow up with, especially in light of this, which has got a link to a LinkedIn post, which obviously is a bit difficult for you to look through at
that's
the
okay.
moment.
I can talk about it because I'm acutely aware of it, and I've actually been
Okay.
involved in the consultation. I think the important thing that we need to recognise is that the building safety role is an optional role. It is not a legal requirement that
Mhm.
RMCs have a building safety director. A building safety director is there to advise, and you can also set the role that you want that individual to actually take. Um, if if a building is managed by an RMC and it is managed well, and the managing agent is doing all that we just been talking about, it's about making sure that we understand costs, that we understand what's needed both legally, and what's needed potentially, then it may be that that particular role is not going to be a requirement for that particular RMC. But
Mhm.
what I've got to say is that it's not in law at the moment.
Yeah.
Okay, so the law has not been passed. We had a consultation come out, would you believe, in 2023. It had to be finished before the end of 2023. We are in Q Q2 of
Yeah.
2026, and we still don't have a government response on the legislation on that at the moment. So I wouldn't hold your breath, but just to remember, the building safety director's role is not a legal requirement. RMCs do not have to engage those individuals. It may be that there's going to be a better way of dealing with it, and managing agents, I believe, are ideally suited to support those particular organizations through this whole process.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay,
That's all. There's no more questions at the moment, so I think we can finish up there. Thank you very much, David, for your time today, and
no
thank
problem.
you
Thank
to
you.
everyone for joining us. Our next webinar is on the 12th of May. Yes, 12th of May, with Charge Guru, who are going to be speaking about the future of EV charging in 2026. So if you would like to join us for that, please do register on the News on the Block website. Otherwise, thank you very much again for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Bye.